The massive mare stood guard over her dying foal in the November rain, both of them chained and abandoned, and Marcus knew he should keep walking like everyone else had. But something in her desperate eyes stopped the homeless veteran cold, and the choice he made in that moment would change 3 lives forever. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The rain fell in relentless sheets that November evening, turning the abandoned industrial lot into a landscape of despair. Puddles merged into shallow lakes, reflecting the gray sky above, and the wind carried with it the bitter cold of approaching winter. In the far corner of this forgotten place, near a rusted fence that had long ago lost its purpose, stood a sight that would break the hardest of hearts. A massive mare, her dappled gray coat darkened by the rain, stood over a small foal lying motionless in the mud. The mare's body formed a protective canopy over her baby, though it did little to shield them from the storm that had been raging for hours. The foal, barely 3 months old, lay on its side with labored breathing that sent small puffs of vapor into the cold air. Its legs were impossibly thin, trembling even in stillness, and its eyes were half closed in a way that suggested it had given up fighting. Around one of its delicate legs was a heavy chain, cruelly fastened to a metal post driven deep into the ground. The chain was far too heavy for such a young creature, its links thick and unforgiving, designed for animals 10 times its size. Whoever had left them here had done so with a calculated cruelty that defied understanding. The mare had not moved from her position in over 12 hours. Her own body showed signs of exhaustion and neglect, ribs pressed against her hide, speaking of weeks without proper food. Her mane hung in wet tangles and her eyes carried a haunted look that came from too much suffering. But despite her own desperate condition, she refused to abandon her foal. Every time the little one's breathing became more shallow, she would lower her great head and nuzzle it gently as if willing her own life force into its fragile body. She nickered softly, a sound that carried both encouragement and grief, urging her baby to hold on just a little longer. The lot where they stood had once been part of a thriving factory complex, but that was decades ago. Now it was nothing more than a dumping ground for society's discarded things, broken machinery, old tires, shattered glass, and apparently unwanted animals. The nearest houses were half a mile away, and most people avoided this area, especially after dark. It was a place where the forgotten came to be forgotten even more. The fact that these 2 magnificent creatures had ended up here spoke volumes about the callousness that existed in some corners of humanity. Throughout the day, a few people had passed by the lot. A couple taking a shortcut had noticed the horses but quickened their pace, not wanting to get involved. A teenager on a bicycle had stopped briefly, pulling out his phone to take a picture, before riding away without a second thought. An elderly woman had stood at the fence for several minutes, her hand over her mouth in horror, but she was too frail to help and too poor to call anyone who might. The world had seen their suffering and chosen to look away, each person finding their own excuse for why this wasn't their problem to solve. As darkness began to fall and the rain showed no signs of letting up, the situation grew more dire. The foal's breathing had become increasingly irregular, and the mare's exhaustion was evident in the way her legs trembled beneath her massive frame. She had not eaten or drunk water since being chained here, and her body was running on nothing but maternal instinct and sheer willpower. Several times she had tried to pull the chain free from the post, her powerful muscles straining against the metal, but it held firm. The more she pulled, the tighter the chain became around her foal's leg, causing the little one to cry out in pain. After several failed attempts, she had stopped trying, realizing that her efforts were only causing more harm. The temperature continued to drop as night approached, and hypothermia became an additional threat to the already critical situation. The foal's body shook uncontrollably now, not just from fever, but from the cold that seeped into its bones. The mare tried to lower herself to the ground to share her body heat more effectively, but the space was too confined, and she could only stand over her baby, providing what meager shelter she could. Her eyes scanned the darkening horizon constantly, as if hoping that someone, anyone, would come to help them. But the lot remained empty, save for the sound of rain drumming against metal and concrete. In the distance, barely visible through the sheets of rain, a solitary figure appeared. He moved slowly, almost shuffling, through the abandoned streets that bordered the industrial lot. His clothes were worn and layered against the cold, a military surplus jacket that had seen better days hanging loose on his thin frame. A tattered backpack hung from his shoulders, containing everything he owned in the world. His face was weathered and lined, bearing the marks of a hard life, but his eyes still held a spark of awareness that many homeless people lost after years on the streets. This was Marcus, a veteran of foreign wars who had returned home to find that the country he fought for had little use for broken soldiers. Marcus had been walking these streets for 3 years now, ever since a combination of PTSD, chronic pain, and bureaucratic indifference had cost him everything: his home, his family, his dignity. He survived by keeping to himself, staying out of trouble, and maintaining the rigid routine that military training had ingrained in him. Every evening at dusk, he made his way to an overpass about 2 miles from here, where he had claimed a dry spot beneath the concrete. He never deviated from his path, never took unnecessary risks, never got involved in situations that didn't concern him. Survival on the streets required discipline and detachment, 2 things his military service had taught him well. But on this particular evening, as he passed the old factory lot, something made him stop. Perhaps it was the sound he heard beneath the rain, a desperate whinny that cut through the storm like a cry for help. Marcus stood frozen at the edge of the lot, straining to hear through the pounding rain. There it was again, that sound. It wasn't the typical noise of the city at night, not car alarms or sirens or the distant rumble of trains. This was something primal, something that spoke of desperation and fear. His first instinct was to keep walking, to pretend he hadn't heard anything. Getting involved in other people's problems was dangerous when you lived on the streets. It drew attention, created complications, and attention was the last thing Marcus needed. He had learned the hard way that heroes ended up in jail or hospitals, neither of which were places a homeless veteran could afford to be. But something held him there at the fence, his fingers gripping the cold metal as his eyes searched the darkness of the lot. His training kicked in automatically, scanning the area for threats, evaluating the situation with the methodical precision that had kept him alive in combat zones. The rain made visibility poor, but movement in the far corner caught his eye. At first he thought it might be people, maybe other homeless folks who had claimed this spot for shelter. But as his eyes adjusted and a flash of distant lightning illuminated the scene, he saw them, the mare and her foal. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. In all his years, both in service and on the streets, he had seen plenty of suffering. He had held dying comrades in his arms, watched villages burn, and witnessed cruelty that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He thought he had become numb to it all, that his heart had developed the calluses necessary to survive in a world that seemed intent on destroying anything beautiful or innocent. But the sight of that massive horse standing over her baby in the pouring rain cracked something open inside him that he thought had been sealed shut forever. He should walk away. That was the smart thing to do, the safe thing. He had no resources to help them, no phone to call animal control, no money for a veterinarian, even if he could get them to one. He was just one man with nothing but the clothes on his back and a few dollars in his pocket that needed to last him the rest of the week. What could he possibly do? The rational part of his mind laid out all these arguments with perfect logic, urging him to turn around and continue to his spot under the overpass before someone else claimed it for the night. But his feet wouldn't move in that direction. Instead, he found himself climbing over the fence, dropping down into the lot with a splash that sent water spraying up his legs. The moment he did so, he knew he had crossed a line. He was committed now, for better or worse. Marcus had learned in the military that once you made a decision, you didn't second-guess yourself. You followed through, adapted to changing circumstances, and completed the mission. As he walked toward the horses, his boots sinking into the mud with each step, he realized that this had become his mission, even if he didn't fully understand why. The mare noticed him when he was still 30 feet away. Her head shot up, and her ears pinned back against her skull in warning. She positioned herself more firmly over her foal, ready to fight if necessary despite her weakened condition. Marcus had grown up around horses on his grandfather's small farm in Kentucky back before the world had gone sideways. He knew that a frightened horse, especially a mother protecting her young, was dangerous even in poor health. That mare could easily kill him with a well-placed kick, and given what she had probably been through, she had every reason to view any human as a threat. Marcus stopped walking and held up his hands slowly, keeping them visible and unthreatening. He spoke in a low, steady voice, the same tone he used to use when approaching his grandfather's skittish mares during thunderstorms. "Easy, girl, easy now. I'm not here to hurt you. I know you're scared. I know you're protecting your baby. I get it. But I need you to trust me just for a minute, just long enough to help." His voice was rough from disuse and the elements, but there was a gentleness in it that seemed to cut through the rain and reach the mare's ears. She didn't relax, but she didn't charge either, which Marcus took as a positive sign. He took another slow step forward, then another, talking continuously in that same calm voice. The mare's nostrils flared as she caught his scent, trying to determine if he was friend or foe. Her eyes, large and dark and filled with intelligence, studied him with an intensity that made Marcus feel as though she could see straight through to his soul. He wondered what she saw there. Did she see the broken man who had lost everything? Did she see the soldier who had taken lives and watched friends die? Or did she somehow see the boy he had once been, the one who used to spend hours in his grandfather's barn, finding peace among the horses when the rest of the world seemed too loud and confusing? When Marcus was close enough to see the details of their condition, his jaw tightened with barely contained rage. The chain around the foal's leg was industrial strength, the kind used to secure heavy equipment. It had rubbed the delicate skin raw, and even in the dim light, he could see the dark stain of blood mixed with mud around the wound. The foal itself looked to be on death's doorstep. Its breathing was shallow and rapid, its eyes glazed with fever, and its small body shook with convulsions that had nothing to do with the cold. Pneumonia, most likely, Marcus thought, along with dehydration and God knew what else. The mare's condition was only marginally better. She was severely underweight, her coat rough and dull beneath the rain. Marcus knelt in the mud beside the foal, ignoring the cold water that immediately soaked through his pants. Up close, the situation was even worse than he had imagined. The little one's pulse was weak and thready, its breathing ragged and labored. He had seen enough combat injuries to recognize the signs of a body shutting down, and this foal was dangerously close to that point. The chain that bound it was secured with a heavy padlock, industrial grade and impossible to break without tools he didn't have. Whoever had done this had wanted to make sure these animals stayed exactly where they were left. The mare watched his every movement with desperate intensity. She nickered softly, a sound that seemed to carry a question, a plea. Marcus looked up at her, and for a moment, their eyes met in a connection that transcended species. In her gaze, he saw something he recognized all too well, the look of someone who had fought with everything they had but was running out of strength to continue. It was the same look he saw in his own reflection on the rare occasions he caught sight of himself in a store window or puddle. They were both warriors who had been abandoned by a world that had no more use for them. "I'm going to help you," Marcus said quietly. though he had no idea how he was going to make good on that promise. The first priority was getting that chain off the foal's leg before it caused any more damage. He shrugged off his backpack and began rummaging through it with hands that shook slightly from cold and adrenaline. Among his meager possessions was a small multi-tool, a relic from his military days that he had managed to hold on to through everything. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. The padlock was heavy-duty, designed to resist tampering, but Marcus had learned a few things during his years in the service and his time on the streets. He worked methodically, using the small file on his multi-tool to scrape away at the lock mechanism. It was slow, frustrating work made worse by the rain and the fading light. His fingers cramped from the cold and the awkward angle, but he kept at it with the same stubborn persistence that had gotten him through multiple tours of duty. The mare stood over him the entire time, her presence both protective and somehow encouraging, as if she understood that he was their only hope. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Marcus lost track of time as he focused entirely on the task at hand. The foal's breathing had become more labored, and twice it had convulsed so badly that Marcus thought it might be dying right there beneath his hands. But each time the mare would lower her head and nuzzle her baby gently, and somehow the little one would stabilize enough to keep breathing. It was as if the mare's will alone was keeping her foal alive, refusing to let death claim it while there was still a chance of rescue. Finally, after what felt like hours, Marcus felt the lock mechanism give way with a small click that was barely audible over the rain. Relief flooded through him as he carefully removed the chain from the foal's injured leg. The skin beneath was raw and infected, but at least the constriction was gone. The foal didn't even react to being freed, too weak to register the change. Marcus quickly took off his jacket despite the cold and wrapped it around the small, shivering body. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Now came the harder question. What next? He couldn't leave them here, that much was certain. The foal would be dead by morning without medical attention, and the mare wasn't far behind. But Marcus had no way to transport them, no place to take them, and no money for veterinary care. He pulled out his phone, a cheap prepaid model that he kept mostly for emergencies, and stared at the screen. The battery was at 15%, and he had maybe $1 worth of minutes left. Who could he even call? Animal control would come eventually, but they would take hours to respond to a call about abandoned horses, and these two didn't have hours. Marcus stood up, his knees protesting after kneeling in the cold mud for so long. He looked around the lot, trying to think of solutions. His eyes fell on a shopping cart that had been abandoned near a pile of debris. It was battered and missing one wheel, but it gave him an idea. If he couldn't get the horses out of here, maybe he could at least make them more comfortable and then find help at first light. He grabbed the cart and began collecting anything that might be useful. There were some old tarps, relatively clean and still waterproof, a few wooden pallets that could create a platform above the mud, some cardboard boxes that, while wet, could provide a bit of insulation. Working quickly, Marcus constructed a makeshift shelter against the fence. He wedged the pallets together to create a raised floor, then draped the tarps over the top and sides to form a crude lean-to. It wasn't much, barely better than what he usually slept in himself, but it would provide some protection from the rain and wind. The hard part was convincing the mare to move to it. She was reluctant to leave the spot where she had been standing for so long, as if moving meant abandoning her post. But Marcus spoke to her in that same calm voice, and slowly, step by careful step, he coaxed her toward the shelter. The mare seemed to understand that he was trying to help. With great effort, she began to move, her legs stiff from standing in one position for so long. Marcus positioned himself at the foal's head and gently began to drag it across the mud toward the shelter, hoping the mare would follow. She did. The mare stayed right beside her baby, matching Marcus's slow pace, step for step. When they finally reached the makeshift shelter, Marcus carefully positioned the foal on the driest part of the pallet floor and covered it with as many layers as he could find. The mare immediately moved to stand over her baby again, but this time at least they had a roof over their heads and were out of the worst of the wind. It wasn't ideal, not even close, but it was better than dying in an open field of mud and rain. Marcus sat back against the fence, exhausted from the effort. His whole body ached and he was soaked through to the bone. The smart thing to do now would be to leave, to get himself to shelter before he ended up sick too. But as he looked at the mare and foal huddled together in the dim shelter, he found he couldn't make himself stand up and walk away. Something had shifted inside him during the past hour, something he couldn't quite name. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he had a purpose beyond simple survival. These animals needed him, and strange as it seemed, he needed them too. He pulled out his phone again and stared at the cracked screen. With his limited minutes, he had maybe one call he could make. Marcus scrolled through his sparse contact list, past the numbers that no longer answered when he called, past the VA hotline that had proven useless too many times, until he landed on a name he hadn't thought about in months. Sarah Chen. She had been a veterinary technician attached to his unit during his second deployment. One of those rare people who treated everyone with genuine kindness, regardless of rank or circumstance. They had kept in touch for a while after he returned stateside, but like most of his old connections, it had faded when his life fell apart. He didn't even know if this number still worked or if she would remember him, but it was the only option he had. With a deep breath, Marcus pressed the call button and held the phone to his ear. It rang once, twice, 3 times. He was about to give up when a woman's voice answered, cautious and slightly annoyed at the late-hour call from an unknown number. "Hello, this is Sarah. Who is this?" Marcus swallowed hard, suddenly feeling foolish. "Sarah, it's Marcus. Marcus Webb. We served together in Afghanistan. I don't know if you remember me." There was a pause on the other end, long enough that Marcus thought she might hang up. Then her voice came back, warmer but filled with concern. "Marcus, of course I remember you. Where are you? Are you okay?" The genuine worry in her voice almost broke him. He hadn't heard anyone speak to him with that kind of concern in so long that he had forgotten what it felt like. "I'm okay, but I need your help. I found some horses, a mare and her foal. They've been abandoned and chained up in an old lot off Industrial Boulevard. The foal is in bad shape, Sarah, really bad. It's got what looks like pneumonia, maybe worse. And it's been out in the rain for who knows how long. I don't have money for a vet, and I don't know what else to do." He heard her sharp intake of breath. "You're still in the city? Marcus, where are you staying?" "Never mind. We'll deal with that later. Give me the exact address. I'm coming now." She was already moving. He could hear it in her voice, the rustle of her grabbing keys and a coat. Marcus gave her the location as best he could, describing the landmarks since he didn't know the actual street address of the abandoned lot. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. "Marcus, stay with them. Keep them warm if you can. And Marcus," her voice softened, "I'm glad you called. I've thought about you over the years, wondered how you were doing. We're going to help these horses, and then we're going to figure out how to help you too." The call ended, and Marcus sat in the darkness with his dead phone, feeling emotions he had kept buried for years threatening to surface. He shoved them back down, focusing instead on the practical matters at hand. Sarah was coming, which meant help was on the way. But 20 minutes could feel like an eternity when you were watching an animal suffer. He turned his attention back to the foal, which had begun shivering more violently despite the layers covering it. Marcus moved closer and did something he hadn't done in years. He lay down on the wet pallet next to the foal and wrapped his body around it, sharing what little body heat he had left. The mare watched him intently for a moment, then seemed to accept this strange human who smelled of the streets but acted with the gentleness of a friend. She lowered her great head down beside Marcus, and together they formed a protective circle around the dying foal. Time moved strangely in that shelter. Marcus drifted in and out of awareness, his own exhaustion pulling at him. He thought about his grandfather's farm, about the horses he had loved as a boy, about how simple life had seemed back then. He thought about the choices that had led him to this moment, lying in the mud with a dying foal, and wondering if any of it had meant anything. The war, the medals, the promises of gratitude and support that evaporated the moment he came home broken. He had survived firefights and explosions, watched friends die and held their hands as they took their last breaths, only to end up here, homeless and forgotten. But maybe, he thought as he felt the foal's fragile heartbeat against his chest, maybe this was where he was supposed to be. Maybe this was the moment that everything else had been leading to. The sound of an engine broke through his thoughts. Headlights swept across the lot and Marcus heard a vehicle door slam. He tried to sit up, but his body protested, stiff and cold from lying on the wet wood. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, and then Sarah was there, kneeling beside him with a medical bag in her hand and tears already streaming down her face. "Oh God, Marcus. Oh my God." She reached out and touched his face, as if she needed to confirm he was real. Then her professional training kicked in and she turned her attention to the horses. She examined the foal quickly but thoroughly, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. When she looked up at Marcus, her expression was grave. "This baby is critical. We need to get it to my clinic now, tonight, or it won't make it till morning." She pulled out her phone and made a call. Within minutes, she explained, a trailer would arrive. She had called a colleague who lived nearby and kept a horse trailer for emergencies. "The mare would need to come too," Sarah said. "She won't survive much longer out here either, and separating them now would be cruel." Marcus watched as Sarah worked, setting up an IV line for the foal with supplies from her bag. She wrapped the injured leg properly, administered antibiotics and fluids, and covered the small body with a thermal blanket she had brought. Her movements were quick but gentle, and she spoke to both horses in a soothing voice that reminded Marcus of why he had always liked her. Sarah had been the kind of person who treated every living thing with dignity and compassion, whether it was a high-ranking officer or a stray dog that wandered into their camp. The trailer arrived 15 minutes later, driven by a bearded man in his 50s who introduced himself as Tom. He took one look at the situation and immediately began setting up a ramp. Getting the mare into the trailer was going to be the challenge. She was weak and frightened, and asking her to leave her foal, even temporarily, was asking the impossible. But Sarah had a plan. They would load the foal first, carrying it into the trailer on a stretcher they improvised from a tarp. Once the foal was inside, the mare would follow, and that was exactly what happened. The moment they carried the foal up the ramp, the mare struggled to her feet and followed on unsteady legs. She nearly fell twice, but her determination to stay with her baby kept her moving forward. Once both horses were secured in the trailer, Tom closed the ramp and turned to Sarah. "I'll follow you to the clinic. Drive carefully. These two have been through enough." Sarah nodded and then turned to Marcus, who stood apart from the group, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked. His clothes were filthy, his hair long and unkempt, and he probably smelled terrible. He had done what he needed to do, and now these people, real people with resources and homes and normal lives, would take over. It was time for him to disappear back into the shadows where he belonged. But Sarah wasn't having it. She walked over to him and grabbed his hand firmly. "You're coming with us, Marcus. Don't even think about arguing." He started to protest, to explain that he didn't need help, that he was fine, but she cut him off with a look that reminded him she had been a sergeant in the army, just like him. She might be a veterinarian now, but she still knew how to give an order. "Marcus, You probably have hypothermia. You're soaked through. You've been lying on cold wood for God knows how long, and you look like you haven't eaten properly in weeks. You're coming to the clinic, you're getting warm and dry, and you're eating something hot. After that, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But right now, you're one of my patients too. Marcus felt something crack inside him, that wall he had built to keep the pain and shame at bay. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Sarah squeezed his hand once more and then led him to her SUV. He climbed into the passenger seat, feeling strange and uncomfortable in the clean vehicle. He tried not to touch anything, hyper-aware of the mud and filth he was bringing into her space. The drive to the clinic took 20 minutes. Sarah didn't push him to talk, sensing that he needed the silence. Instead, she told him about the clinic, how she had opened it 3 years ago with a partner, how they focused on helping animals whose owners couldn't afford traditional veterinary care. "We see a lot of cases like this," she said quietly. "People abandoning animals when they become inconvenient." When they arrived at the clinic, it was nearly midnight. The building was small but well-maintained, with a bright sign that read, "Hope Haven Veterinary Care." Tom had already backed the trailer up to a side entrance, and Sarah immediately went into action mode. She grabbed her keys and unlocked the clinic, flipping on lights as she went. Marcus followed hesitantly, feeling more out of place with each step into this clean, professional environment. The next hour was a blur of activity. Sarah and Tom carefully unloaded the foal first, carrying it on the makeshift stretcher into an examination room. The mare followed, her hooves clopping on the tile floor, her eyes never leaving her baby. Sarah had converted one of the larger exam rooms into a temporary stall, with rubber mats on the floor and railings along the walls. It wasn't ideal, but it would work for tonight. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching as Sarah examined the foal more thoroughly under the bright clinical lights. The little one's condition looked even worse now that he could see it clearly. Its breathing was labored, each inhale a struggle that seemed to take all its remaining strength. Sarah worked quickly, checking vital signs, drawing blood, listening to its lungs with a stethoscope. Her face grew more concerned with each passing minute. "This is severe pneumonia, possibly aspiration pneumonia," she said to Tom, who was assisting her. "There's also dehydration, malnutrition, and this leg wound is badly infected. I'm going to start aggressive antibiotic therapy and get more fluids into it, but I won't lie to you. This foal is in critical condition. The next 24 hours will tell us whether it has the strength to fight back." Marcus felt his chest tighten as he listened. He had saved them from that lot, but had it been enough? Had he acted too late? The thought that his intervention might have been pointless, that these beautiful creatures might die anyway, was almost unbearable. He must have made some sound because Sarah looked up at him, her expression softening. "Marcus, you saved their lives tonight. Whatever happens now, you gave them a chance they wouldn't have had. That matters." She turned back to her work, inserting another IV line and adjusting the oxygen flow to the foal's nose. The mare stood as close as she could, occasionally lowering her head to nuzzle her baby, offering what comfort only a mother could give. Once Sarah had stabilized the foal as much as possible, she turned her attention to the mare. The big horse was exhausted, barely able to stand, but she remained alert and focused on her offspring. Sarah examined her thoroughly, noting the weight loss, the dehydration, the signs of prolonged stress and neglect. "This mare has been suffering for weeks, maybe months," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Whoever did this to them deserves to rot in hell." She set up an IV for the mare as well, gave her antibiotics and vitamins, and offered her food and water. At first, the mare refused to eat, too worried about her foal. But Sarah was patient, hand-feeding her small amounts until the horse finally accepted that eating wouldn't mean abandoning her baby. Marcus watched it all from his position by the door, marveling at Sarah's skill and compassion. When both horses were finally settled, Sarah washed her hands and walked over to Marcus. "Your turn," she said firmly. "Come on, there's a bathroom down the hall where you can clean up, and I've got some clothes you can change into. They belong to my ex-husband, but they should fit you reasonably well." Marcus wanted to refuse to say he was fine, but the truth was he was freezing and exhausted. He nodded and followed her down the hall. The bathroom was small but clean, with hot water that felt like heaven when Marcus finally stood under the shower. He watched the mud and grime wash away, swirling down the drain, and for a moment he let himself cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that mixed with the water and disappeared. He cried for the horses, for himself, for all the broken things in the world that nobody seemed to care about fixing. When he finally emerged, dressed in clean clothes that smelled like laundry detergent, he felt more human than he had in years. Sarah was waiting for him with a sandwich and a cup of hot coffee. They sat in her small office, and for the first time Marcus told someone the whole story of what had happened to him. How he had come back from his third deployment with injuries both visible and invisible. How the VA had failed him repeatedly, losing paperwork, denying claims, making him wait months for appointments while his life fell apart around him. How he had lost his job because of the PTSD episodes he couldn't control, then lost his apartment, then his wife, who couldn't handle being married to a broken man. Sarah listened without interrupting, without judging. When Marcus finished talking, Sarah reached across the desk and took his hand. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry the system failed you. You deserved better. We all do when we come back." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want to help you, but I need you to let me. Will you stay here tonight? Just for tonight. We have a couch in the break room, and honestly, I need someone to help me monitor these horses. The foal needs checking every 2 hours, and I could use an extra set of hands." Marcus knew what she was doing. She was giving him a purpose, a reason to accept help that didn't feel like charity. It was a kindness he hadn't experienced in a long time. He nodded slowly. "I can do that. I want to help them." Sarah smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Marcus had seen directed at him in years. They set up a schedule for the night. Marcus would take the first watch while Sarah caught a few hours of sleep on the couch. She showed him what to look for, how to check the foal's vitals, when to call her if anything changed. Then she reluctantly left him alone with the horses, though not before making him promise to wake her if he needed anything at all. Marcus pulled a chair into the makeshift stall and sat down where he could watch both horses. The mare had finally allowed herself to lie down, though she positioned herself so she could still see her foal. Her eyes were half closed, exhaustion winning out over her protective instincts. The foal lay on a thick bed of blankets, its small chest rising and falling with each labored breath. The oxygen tube in its nose hissed softly, and the IV bags dripped their life-saving fluids into its fragile body. For the first time in hours, Marcus had a chance to really think about what had happened. Just that morning, he had woken up under an overpass. Another day stretching ahead of him with nothing to fill it but the struggle to survive. Now he sat in a warm clinic wearing clean clothes, watching over 2 horses whose lives had become inexplicably intertwined with his own. It felt surreal, like something that was happening to someone else, someone who still deserved good things. The hours passed slowly. Marcus checked the foal every few minutes, even though Sarah had said every 2 hours was sufficient. He couldn't help himself. Each time the foal's breathing seemed to slow or its body twitched, his heart would race with fear that this was it, that death was finally claiming the small creature despite all their efforts. But each time, the foal would stabilize, its small body continuing to fight with a determination that reminded Marcus of himself in his better days. Around 3 in the morning, the mare woke up and struggled to her feet. She moved stiffly over to where her foal lay and lowered her head to sniff it thoroughly, checking that her baby was still alive. Satisfied, she turned to look at Marcus. In the dim light of the clinic, her eyes seemed to hold a question. or perhaps an acknowledgement. Marcus stood up slowly and approached her, moving with the same caution he had shown in the lot. "I know you're scared," he said softly. "I know you don't understand what's happening or why you're here, but I promise you we're trying to help. Your baby is sick, really sick. But the woman who's taking care of you, she's good at what she does. She's going to do everything she can." He reached out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the mare allowed him to touch her neck. Her coat was rough and matted, but beneath his fingers, Marcus could feel the warmth of life, the steady beat of her heart. They stood there together for several minutes, man and horse, two beings who had survived things they shouldn't have and were still standing. Marcus felt something shift in that moment, a connection forming that went beyond the simple fact that he had freed them from that chain. This mare understood suffering. She understood what it meant to keep fighting when everything inside you wanted to give up. They were kindred spirits in a way that transcended species. As dawn began to break outside the windows, Sarah emerged from the break room looking rumpled but alert. She came immediately to check on the foal, and what she saw made her smile. Its breathing had improved slightly, becoming more regular and less labored. The fever that had raged through its small body had dropped a few degrees. It wasn't out of danger yet, not by a long shot, but these were good signs, indicators that the treatment was working and the foal's body was responding. "Marcus, this is good," Sarah said, unable to keep the hope out of her voice. "It's still critical, but it's fighting back. That's what we need to see." She checked the mare next and was equally pleased to find that the big horse had eaten some of the hay Sarah had left for her and had drunk a significant amount of water. "These are survivors," Sarah said, looking at both horses with professional appreciation. "They've been through hell, but they're not giving up." The morning brought with it new challenges and decisions that needed to be made. Sarah made coffee and brought Marcus a cup along with a bagel from the small refrigerator in the break room. As they sat together watching the horses in the early morning light, she broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "We need to report this, Marcus. What happened to these horses? That wasn't just neglect. Someone deliberately chained them up and left them to die. That's animal cruelty, and it's a crime." Marcus nodded, understanding the necessity, but feeling a knot form in his stomach. Getting authorities involved meant questions, reports, and attention. It meant his name going into official systems, his homeless status being documented. But Sarah was right. Whoever had done this couldn't be allowed to get away with it. If they could do this to animals, what else were they capable of? He took a deep breath and agreed. Sarah called animal control first, then the police. Within an hour, officers arrived at the clinic to take statements and photograph the horses. A detective named Rodriguez, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully as Marcus described finding the horses and everything he had observed. She took notes meticulously, asking detailed questions about the chain, the padlock, and the condition of the lot where they had been abandoned. "You did the right thing, Mr. Webb," Detective Rodriguez said when Marcus finished his statement. "Most people would have walked right past. The fact that you stopped, that you helped, that says something about your character." She paused, looking at him with an expression that was both professional and sympathetic. "Sarah told me a bit about your situation. I want you to know that there are resources available, programs for veterans. I can give you some information before I leave." Marcus felt his defenses go up automatically. He had heard all about these resources before. They had waiting lists months long and requirements he couldn't meet without a permanent address. But he nodded politely, not wanting to seem ungrateful. The detective seemed to sense his skepticism because she pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back before handing it to him. "This is my brother's number. He runs a transitional housing program specifically for homeless veterans. Call him and tell him I sent you. He'll find you a spot." After the authorities left, Promising to investigate and try to track down whoever had abandoned the horses, Sarah and Marcus settled back into the routine of caring for their patients. The foal continued to show small signs of improvement throughout the day. Its breathing became easier, and it even lifted its head a few times, looking around with glassy but more alert eyes. The mare stayed close, her maternal instincts overriding her own need for rest and recovery. Around midday, Sarah's business partner arrived. Elena was a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a braid and an air of competence that filled the room. She had been away at a conference when Sarah called her about the emergency, but she had driven back as soon as she could. When she saw the horses, tears filled her eyes. She examined them both thoroughly, conferring with Sarah in low tones, and then turned to Marcus with an extended hand. "You saved their lives. Thank you." Elena's grip was firm and sincere. "Sarah told me everything. I want you to know that these horses will have a home here for as long as they need it. We'll find them a permanent placement eventually, but they'll stay with us through their recovery. And Marcus, you're welcome here too. Sarah says you've got away with them, especially with the mare. We could use someone like you around here." Marcus didn't know what to say. The offer was tempting, almost too tempting, but he was homeless, jobless, and carrying baggage that he didn't want to burden anyone else with. Before he could voice his concerns, Sarah spoke up. "We have an apartment above the clinic. It's small, just a studio really, but it has a bed, a bathroom, and a kitchen. Our last tenant moved out 2 months ago, and we haven't found anyone to rent it to yet. You could stay there, Marcus. In exchange, you could help us with the horses and other animals. It wouldn't be charity. It would be work. Honest work." The two women looked at him expectantly, and Marcus felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it as hope. He wanted to say yes more than he had wanted anything in years, but the fear held him back. What if he failed? What if his PTSD acted up and he did something to jeopardize this opportunity? What if he wasn't capable of being the person they seemed to think he was? Sarah must have seen the conflict on his face, because she stood up and walked over to him. "Marcus, I know you're scared. I know you've been let down too many times to trust easily. But sometimes you have to take a leap of faith. These horses did. They trusted you enough to let you help them when they had every reason to fear humans." Marcus looked at the mare, who was watching him from across the room with those deep, knowing eyes. Sarah was right. That magnificent animal had been abused, abandoned, and chained in the rain, yet she had allowed him to approach her, to help her, to free her foal. If she could trust again after everything she had been through, maybe he could too. He turned back to Sarah and Elena, and for the first time in 3 years, he made a decision based on hope instead of fear. "Okay. Yes, I'll try. Thank you." The relief and joy on both women's faces was immediate and genuine. Sarah hugged him impulsively, and even the normally reserved Elena smiled broadly. They spent the next hour showing him the apartment, which was indeed small but clean and furnished with the basics. To Marcus, who had been sleeping on concrete and cardboard, it looked like a palace. There was a real bed with clean sheets, a shower with reliable hot water, and a window that looked out over the street below. It was more than he had dared to hope for. That afternoon, while the horses rested under Elena's watchful eye, Sarah took Marcus to a local thrift store and helped him pick out some clothes that actually fit. She bought him toiletries, socks, and a warm coat, brushing off his protests about repayment. "Consider it an advance on your salary," she said with a smile that told him not to argue. They stopped at a grocery store on the way back, and Sarah filled a cart with basics: pasta, rice, canned goods, coffee, and fresh vegetables. Marcus felt overwhelmed by her generosity, but she simply squeezed his shoulder and said, "You'd do the same for anyone else. That's the kind of person you are." Over the next few weeks, A routine developed that gave structure and purpose to Marcus's days. He woke early each morning and went down to the clinic to check on the horses. The foal, whom Sarah had named Hope, continued to improve day by day. Its breathing strengthened, the fever broke completely, and slowly but surely it began to stand on its own wobbly legs. The infected wound on its leg healed with proper treatment, leaving only a scar that would serve as a reminder of what it had survived. The mare, whom Marcus had started calling Grace, recovered more quickly than her foal. With regular food, water, and medical care, she regained weight and strength. Her coat began to shine again, and the haunted look in her eyes gradually faded. But what struck everyone who worked at the clinic was the bond that had formed between Grace and Marcus. The big mare followed him everywhere he went, nickering softly when he entered the room and resting her head on his shoulder when he stood near her. It was as if she recognized him not just as her rescuer, but as someone who understood her pain. Marcus threw himself into the work at the clinic with a dedication that surprised even himself. He cleaned stalls, fed animals, assisted with examinations, and learned everything Sarah and Elena were willing to teach him. He had a natural gift with the animals, especially the traumatized ones. Dogs that cowered from everyone else would eventually come to him. Cats that hissed and scratched calmed under his gentle hands. It was as if his own experience with trauma gave him an instinctive understanding of what these creatures needed. In the evenings, Marcus would sit with Grace and Hope, sometimes talking to them about his day, sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence. He told them things he had never told another living soul. About the nightmares that still woke him in the middle of the night, about the guilt he carried for surviving when so many of his friends hadn't, about the shame of having fallen so far. Grace would listen, her ears forward, and somehow Marcus felt lighter after these conversations. It was as if she carried some of his burden for him just by being present and understanding. Detective Rodriguez called one afternoon with news. They had tracked down the person responsible for abandoning the horses. It turned out to be a failed businessman who had bought Grace when she was pregnant, planning to start a breeding operation. When the market crashed and he lost his money, he had simply walked away from everything, including the animals in his care. He would face charges for animal cruelty, and his remaining animals had been seized and placed in rescue organizations. Justice, though it couldn't undo the suffering, was at least being served. As winter progressed into early spring, hope grew stronger and more playful. The foal would prance around the paddock that Elena had set up behind the clinic, its mother watching with obvious pride. Marcus watched them together and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of peace. He had a home now, modest as it was, as he had work that mattered, colleagues who respected him, and these two horses who had given him back his purpose. Sarah encouraged Marcus to start dealing with his VA benefits again, and this time, with a permanent address and her help navigating the bureaucracy, things moved forward. He began receiving disability payments and started therapy with a counselor who specialized in PTSD. The therapy was hard, forcing Marcus to confront memories and feelings he had spent years trying to bury. There were setbacks, days when the darkness threatened to pull him under again. But now he had Grace and Hope to go to, and somehow their presence made the difficult work bearable. They had survived their trauma, and watching them heal gave him permission to believe that he could heal too. 6 months after that rainy night when Marcus had found them, Hope was completely recovered. The once fragile foal had grown into a healthy, spirited young horse full of energy and curiosity. Grace had regained her full strength and beauty, her dappled coat gleaming in the sun. Sarah and Elena had received several inquiries from people interested in adopting them, good people with proper facilities who would give them excellent homes. But each time they mentioned it to Marcus, he would grow quiet and withdrawn, and the horses seemed to sense his distress. One evening, Sarah found Marcus sitting in the paddock with Grace's head resting on his lap, while Hope dozed nearby. She sat down beside him, not speaking at first, just watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know we can't keep them here forever, Marcus. This clinic isn't set up for long-term boarding, and they need more space to run and live properly. They need a real home." Marcus nodded, his hand absently stroking Grace's nose. "I know. I've been thinking about that." He paused, gathering his courage. "Sarah, I've been saving my paychecks and the disability payments. I have enough now for a down payment on some land. There's a property about 20 miles from here, just a few acres with a small house and a barn. It's not much, but it would be enough for them. For us." His voice was uncertain, as if he couldn't quite believe he was saying these words out loud. Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "Marcus, are you saying what I think you're saying? Are you ready to take them? To really commit to caring for them long term?" Marcus met her gaze and nodded slowly. "These horses saved my life, Sarah. That night in the rain, I was at the end of my rope. I had nothing to live for, no reason to keep going, but they needed me, and that need pulled me back from the edge. I owe them everything. More than that, though, I love them. They're not just animals to me. They're family." Sarah smiled through tears that were now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Then let's make it happen. Elena and I will help you with whatever you need. We can co-sign on the loan if necessary, help you set up the property properly. Hell, we'll come out on weekends and help you build fences if that's what it takes." Marcus felt something swell in his chest, an emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. It was gratitude, yes, but also something more. It was the feeling of being part of a community again, of mattering to people, of having a future worth planning for. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. Marcus bought the property with Sarah and Elena's help. It wasn't fancy, just a modest house that needed work, and a barn that had seen better days. But it had good bones, as Marcus's grandfather used to say, and it had something more important than perfection. It had potential. Marcus threw himself into fixing it up, working alongside volunteers from the community who had heard his story and wanted to help. Veterans groups sent workers. The local hardware store donated materials. Slowly but surely, the property transformed into a real home. The day they moved Grace and Hope to their new home was one of the best days of Marcus's life. He led them out of the trailer and into the paddock, then stood back and watched as they explored their new space. Hope ran in circles, bucking and playing with pure joy. Grace walked the perimeter more sedately, taking everything in, and then she walked straight to where Marcus stood and pressed her forehead against his chest. In that moment, Marcus understood that she was thanking him, acknowledging what he had done for her and her baby. Marcus continued working at the clinic part-time, but he also began offering a new service. He started taking in rescue horses that needed rehabilitation, especially those that had been traumatized or abused. Using what he had learned from Grace and Hope, from Sarah and Elena, and from his own journey of healing, he helped these broken animals learn to trust again. Word spread, and soon people from all over the region were contacting him about horses that needed his particular kind of care. On the one-year anniversary of finding Grace and Hope, Marcus stood at the fence of his property watching the sunset. The small farm now housed 5 horses, including his original 2. Grace and Hope stood together in the paddock, the evening light making their coats glow. Hope, now fully grown, was the image of her mother, strong and beautiful. Grace had her head up, ears forward, looking every inch the magnificent creature she had always been meant to be. Marcus thought about that rainy night, about the broken man who had stumbled upon 2 dying horses and made the choice to help, despite having nothing to give. He thought about how that single decision had changed everything, had given him back his life and his purpose. Sometimes, he reflected, the act of saving another creature is really an act of saving yourself. By giving Grace and Hope a second chance, he had given himself one too. As darkness fell and the stars began to appear, Marcus whispered into the night a simple prayer of gratitude for rain-soaked lots, for chains that could be broken, for the resilience of both horses and humans, and for second chances that arrived when you least expected them but needed them most.